right, let me make sure. Looks like we got everything set up here. We're gonna dive into chat. Oh, yeah. We're gonna dive into chapter seven. Let me make sure I'm out of all this. Chapter seven, like every other business class you'll ever take, there's always a section on global business. You can not only take a class on global business, but again, almost every business textbook has a chapter in there about global business. So this one we're going to fly through really quickly. The reason in part is many of you that are from a foreign country are probably well aware of all the transnational businesses um, and the opportunities that exist, and a lot of times the problems and dilemmas that come up. A number of you, many, maybe most of you are not going to necessarily work at a company that has multinational operations. So to dive into this at such an utterly deep level, I'm afraid is going to take up brain space for you that I don't want to have happen. So we're going to fly through this chapter very quickly. It's going to be painful, so you might want to go get some coffee or something like that. Be ready to pause the video as we go through it because a lot of it's just going to be me reading off. And I know I'm sure I've said that before, but this one really will be because I want it to go fast. And the textbook, the chapter has like two or three frameworks. And actually, I'm going to stop there. There's two or three frameworks that I will share with you that I want you to know. Those are frameworks you're going to see again in the future. And those are frameworks that I want you to be aware of because they're important to understand. Aside from that, a lot of what the rest of the book talks about, which it's a strategic management book, talks about like when you should go and operate internationally or transnationally, advantages, disadvantages, and those types of things. So this isn't rocket science. We're just going to go through when you should and when you shouldn't do that. Okay, so we're good to go. So again, let me hit share. There we go. We are in chapter seven again for strategic management, BADM 485. So the first thing I want to cover with you, because the textbook touches on this, but they don't give a good diagram or an explanation of how to understand this. So one of the questions is, what ways can we take part in international business and trade? And I really like this diagram because it tells you based on a level of risk which one of these ways is the least risky versus the most risky. So vitally important that you would know this in case the company or the organization you work for at some point wants to start doing business overseas. When we looked at the Ansoff matrix, one of our options is to sell the same product to a new market or group of people. And that gets into this one. So the first one they talk about is global outsourcing. Global outsourcing can be having countries in other places, parts of the world, manufacture components and then sell them to you here. One of the downsides to that is there becomes an issue with the foreign exchange rates. And there's a way that that gets managed. Most transnational businesses, international or businesses that operate internationally will very often, and this is sort of my opinion or my thinking on this, they'll usually go get a bank account at Bank of America, Citigroup or Citibank, whatever it is, or Wells Fargo. These banks have operations internationally. They have them all over the world. So when a company wants to operate in a part of the world, they want to make sure that they have an account with one of these banks that operate near and around the area that they're doing business. Now, if you're doing global outsourcing, you don't have to worry about this. You do have to worry about the exchange rate risk. So when that happens, those large banks have divisions or products, financial products and services that help manage that foreign exchange rate risk that can happen. So it used to be 10 years ago, I believe, like the Canadian dollar was almost on par with the US dollar. I believe now in the last 10 years it's gone down and it's like 70, don't quote me on this one, but it's quite a bit, the value is quite a bit less than the American dollar. Um, just something to understand. So the next lowest risk way of partaking in international business would be importing and exporting or counter trading. Then after that, you get to licensing and franchising. So similar to a franchise in the United States, you do the same thing, but you operate that franchise or have allow someone overseas to operate a franchise, or you allow them to license to use your name or likeness or your company's name or likeness to sell something. Then you have joint ventures, and then the most risky is allowing a wholly owned subsidiary in another country to operate. Okay, so might want to take a picture of that one just to be aware because that probably will be a test question again. The next thing I want to talk about that your book doesn't talk about is trying to understand cultural differences. We have many tools to use if you were to go work at General Electric, for example, and you were being asked to go work somewhere internationally or in Germany or something like that. They would sit down with you and talk to you for a few hours about, hey, be ready for the cultural differences in wherever you're headed. So what we often use is something called Hofstede's model of cultural dimensions. We're not going to watch any videos on it. You can go out on YouTube and just type in Hofstede's model or dimensions. Now, here somewhere it says that there's four of them. I thought there was like five or six, but it doesn't matter. It breaks it out on these different dimensions. Um, Hofstede was an organizational psychologist that was, I think it was working for IBM, and they were having expatriates end up coming back to the United States because they could not adjust to the culture overseas. So Hofstede said, "Well, how are we different from other countries?" And he came up with a model. I think this is the globe model, and it analyzes a culture based on these different dimensions. I think we have eight different dimensions here. So, is this culture a collectivist culture? If you go over to Japan, for example, uh, Japan is much more of a collectivist culture. China is a collectivist culture, especially compared to the United States, Great Britain, and Australia. All of those countries are very individualistic. We root for the underdog, and um, yeah. The other is future orientation. Are you here for today? Are you here to make sure the future is operating good, even maybe at the sacrifice of what's going on at the moment? Uh, Gender egalitarianism, humane orientation, performance orientation. What that is how is performance valued, either individual or a group? Power distance, that means sort of like the respect for authority. Level of uncertainty, um, acceptance of uncertainty. Trying to think of a country that's really, really big on. Um, I think it's Australia can handle a lot of risk and uncertainty. And then assertiveness and kind of similar to the in-group, the institutional versus collectivist nature. It- yeah. No, we won't go there. So why don't you take a minute, go out online and go watch a video on Hofstede's dimensions. One of them they talk about is, I want to say it's like masculine or something like that. And what they're talking about is not feminine versus masculine in the nature we think. It's actually assertiveness. Okay. That's what we would really call it. Unfortunately, Hofstede, when he was naming those things, called it that. So, okay, now we're going to get into the painful nitty-gritty of the rest of this chapter. So, our learning objectives try to identify the primary reason companies choose to compete in an international market, understand why and how different market conditions across countries influence a company's strategy choices in international markets, and to identify the five general modes of entry into foreign markets. We've already done that. Okay. Now, your book might call it something different, but they're very much, you know, they're just calling it something different. Um, Identify the three main options for tailoring a company's international strategy for cross-country differences in market conditions and buyer preferences, and explain how multinational companies are able to use international operations to improve overall competitiveness and recognize the unique characteristics of competing in developing countries. All right, so here are some reasons why companies would want to get into operating in a different country. One, gives you access to new customers. In the Ansoff Matrix, that was one of our options, is go sell to a different set of customers that you don't currently sell to, but sell the same product. Okay. You are trying to achieve lower costs through economies of scale, experience, increased purchasing power. That also can get involved in location. Um, when a Chinese company is trying to sell products to the United States, if they manufacture them over in China, the one downside, even though they make them for almost nothing, the one downside is they have to put them on one of these mega ships, and it takes weeks or months to get over here. So that's not cheap. If they want to get them over here faster, then usually their option is to fly them over, and then it's horrifyingly expensive. So you're asking that question, is this worthwhile? Um, Trying to gain access to low cost inputs of production because of maybe operating closer to the point of production, you might be able to decrease that shipping cost or those sales or cost of inputs because you're buying the raw material locally. Try to exploit our core competency more so in that nation. Gain access to resources and capabilities located in foreign markets, and retain their position as a key supply chain partner to major customers. Um, some of the things that we want to pay attention to how strategy is formed or the influences on that are these. One, the degree to which there are important cross-country differences in demographic, cultural, and market conditions. Um, those, again, those are forces that are acting upon the ability to strategically sell or sell in that country. Um, One of the other ones is the opportunity to exist to gain location-based advantages because wages are lower. Maybe worker productivity is higher. Inflation might be not as bad, so costs of materials might be less. Energy costs are going to be less the closer you are to your end sales point of sale. Tax rates might be better in certain countries. Also, one of the things you have to watch out for that's going to impact your ability to operate overseas is that exchange rate risk. Okay. Companies, businesses that do trade overseas often will have money or like a best way to maybe explain it is like a savings account that gets managed and it buys and sells the currency that they're operating in. And if one nation's currency drops, a company might go buy that, waiting for it to go back up. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to mitigate that interest rate risk, or excuse me, exchange rate risk that can happen. Managing interest rate risk would be something very similar to that as well. So if you look at financial products like derivatives, forwards, futures, options, interest rate swaps, those are all tools used so the company is not going to they're able to mitigate the risk of that foreign exchange rate shifting. Um, Governmental policies that which is laws of the foreign country can have an influence on the ability to do that. Um, we're going to skip that one. So your book talks a little bit about how demographics change from country to country. Um, yeah, well, people are different and cultures are different. So the other impact of that is, for example, if you go to China, um, male female stereotypes might be amplified a little more than what you might see in the United States. They may have much more traditional roles. I think I've been to China like once, so I don't want to talk too much about that. In other countries, consumer tastes and preferences can be quite different. In the United States now, like 50 years ago, McDonald's was the biggest thing in the world, and every country wanted to have a McDonald's in it. Now, even in the US, the consumption of McDonald's is, well, I would assume it's gone down. And now we kind of, our tastes have shifted where there seems to be a preference for like mom and pop, locally owned and grown uh, food versus a McDonald's. The ability for the consumer to buy those products or services, if you were to go over, trying to think of something luxury or what we would say is like normal average every day, but if you were to go over to a different country, it would be an absolute luxury. You know, maybe a Gillette razor. Most folks, well, when I was in the Marine Corps, we spent about a week and a half in Thailand. Uh, 6 days were training and then 4 days of liberty or something like that. And when we went out, we learned that like the average bartender made $20, what was it? $20 a month. That was like the average wage. So you can imagine if I were to throw down, sitting there having a beer or a couple beers and I throw down a $10 bill, that would be equivalent to somebody in the United States throwing down two or $3,000. Um, Absolutely huge amount of money. So you have to take note of that because then those people can't buy certain items that from the United States, vehicles, for example, they couldn't afford it if you're only making $20 a month. Um, Distribution demand for localized products over the foreign product, um, and then competitive rivalry changes. Um, Opportunities for location-based cost advantages, the big ones, wages and rates. I just talked to you about Thailand, and this was many years ago, but the average wage was $20. So imagine if you're a company, you're Nike or somebody, and you come in and you're having these folks, you're hiring them to make shoes. There was a whole kerfuffle like 10, 20, 30 years ago about Nike having its shoes manufactured in China. And people would come in and they'd have like, well, it's child labor and how could you do such a thing? And one of the egotistical things that when the news broke of these child factories, a counterpoint came out and said, wait a minute, do you get that Nike, that what they pay compared to any other job in this part of the world is they pay like 3 to 4 times as much as anybody else is working. So the point was a child, a 12-year-old, could go work for Nike and they could make more than their entire family was making. I'm not trying to justify child labor, what I'm like whatsoever. But when those companies started talking about doing away with that, can you imagine if you had 120 12-year-olds working at a factory and you say, well, we're leaving because our customer doesn't want to buy products they think that are being made by children. And now you have households and families that can't eat because their sole source of money was their 12-year-old son. So, something to think about. There's always a flip side. Um, Worker productivity in some parts of the world, for example, compared to the United States, productivity is much, much, much lower. That's not like a purpose or a thing. You go over to other parts of the world, trying to think of one of them. China, Japan, I think is somewhat this way. Their productivity can be like insane compared to the United States. I don't know if it still is. Energy costs might be quite different, maybe because the where you're operating would be close to a source of energy, therefore your energy rates are cheaper. Environmental regulation might be less, tax rates might be less, inflation rates might be lower, access to resources that you wouldn't have. These are all advantages of potentially operating internationally. Um, Yeah, we're gonna skip this. I tried to put a little uh red X out circle thing on slides that I wanted to skip, but um so uh, here we're talking about the exchange rate risk and shifts in those. I'm just going to read these off. So an exporter gains in competitiveness when the currency of the country in which they're exporting goods are manufactured is weak relative to the currency of the country to which the goods will be exported. Okay. Um, yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. An exporter is at a disadvantage, okay, when the currency of the country where the exported goods are manufactured grows stronger relative to the country to which the goods will be exported. Okay. I'm not going to dive into that too deep, but you can imagine if you are Nike and you are trying to figure out whether or not you want to export to Germany and you're looking at your accounting system, your monetary system, your checking account, frankly, or savings account, you're trying to figure out, well, wait, is Germany's exchange rate, is it stronger or weaker than what ours is? And then you're trying to figure out, well, wait, what do we want to make sure we're doing so we can offset any of that exchange rate risk? I'm going to leave it at that because that can mentally for most people get very, very convoluted when we're talking about that. Mostly because none of us actually have like cash anymore. It's all done electronically. Um, one of the things that can happen is a positive impact to the host country's government policies on the business climate. They might do things like lend money to these importers or these companies wanting to operate there at lower rates, or they'll give them tax advantages, reduce tax amounts because they're trying to generate the economy. They might give assistance, maybe a discount when buying land. And in the United States, we do that. Here in Brookings, we've done that, I believe, with Target, and we did that with Walmart, um, among a couple of other businesses. I think with Bell Cheese, we gave them a discount or incentivized it because it was a solid company that can create a lot of jobs in Brookings. The problem is if you're a local business, let's say you're the Cottonwood or Cottonwood Bistro coffee place in town, and you're paying property taxes and you're paying taxes on all this, and you're not getting a discount. It's like, why does this big company get it? They have all the resources in the world, and then we get hosed. And in fact, in that sense, it's like we're funding, bringing them into town. So, um, here are some of the negative impacts of host country governmental policies on the business climate. Increasing environmental regulations, tariffs. This is now a huge one. Who knew that was going to crop back up? But tariffs with other countries right now is causing the markets to go up and down because of fear. There might be import and export quotas that the government sets, content requirements, or I would say, I don't like the word content, but there's various requirements that the country or the city might force upon the business that's trying to operate there. Um, with if you wanted to expand, a lot of times that can be limited in foreign countries. Or a huge one in the United States is the historical society. A lot of people don't want to buy homes in historical areas because they can't make renovations on them. They can't add or take away or change what it is because the historical society has a lock on that area. Um, Limits on repatriation of local funds, local ownership or partnership requirements, subsidies on domestic companies. So that would be the opposite of Walmart or Target and Cottonwood Bistro. The country or that government might be penalizing those trying to come into the country to operate, but they may incentivize a competitor to that business. So this gets into the various ways and strategies of getting involved in business overseas. That's why the first diagram I showed you had all the five level to risk. So now we're just going directly into that. So talking about exporting, talking about political risk, economic risk when operating overseas. We're going to skip that one. Um, One discussion, strategy options for entering foreign markets. I'm just going to stop. I'm not even going to read off these. I'm just going to go ahead and stop, pause the video, and read through that. They're talking about licensing, some downsides to licensing. Again, that this is all based on that first diagram I showed you that this textbook actually didn't even list, which was disappointing. So that's another opportunity to get in there. Now they talk about franchising. Earlier diagram may have combined those. I'm just going to let you read these. I move. Yep. Sorry. Having a foreign owned subsidiary. Again, if you go back to the beginning. So one of the issues is going in and dealing with an alliance with others that operate in these foreign countries. You want to do it strategically, which would be the strategy to do this would be very similar to a merger or acquisition or an integration. Okay, you're looking for the same things. You want to look for companies where their competitive advantage pairs well with your competitive advantage or core competencies. Um, One of the things to know, this will probably be a test question, is I don't talk about this too much in here, but when we talk about like buying an existing business versus starting a business from scratch, it often makes a lot more sense to buy an existing business because the hardest thing that existing business had to do was figure out how to generate revenue. And once they generated enough revenue to make it the business sustainable or even profitable, that's probably the hardest thing to do in most businesses. So when you're buying an existing business, there is a value to that, because that's probably that's like the hardest thing to do most of the time. Um, all right, I'll let you read that one. They're talking about the alliance and joint ventures still when it makes sense or what to worry about or to care about. These are benefits for alliances or for the individual partner in operating with another partner. Skip that one. Some of the downsides to an alliance, issues that crop up. And then we get into the three strategies. I don't know what you'd call this, maybe three ways of trying to expand globally. You have a multi-domestic strategy, a transnational strategy, and a global strategy. Okay. And this is a summary snapshot of basically what these three strategies are. So, a domestic strategy, and we're going to jump down here. This is a better one, is think local, act local. So, you're trying to maximize your position in your sphere of influence or your sphere of where you're located at. Um, and you want to, there's a word I'm trying to remember, saturate. You're trying to saturate that area first before you go on to other things. It's other countries or selling to other different markets. You have a global strategy, which is think global, but you act uh, yeah, global strategy is think global, act global. And then you have a transnational strategy, which is think global, act local. Okay. Um, when we talk about a multi-domestic strategy, um, I'm just going to let you guys read these. What you need to remember are these three options for trying to expand the business nationally. Okay. Multi-domestic, global, transnational. And I'm going to give you this one at the end of the PowerPoint for chapter 7. This is that previous diagram. It's just laid out a little more clean. You might want to go in and download the PowerPoint and copy and paste that into a Word document and read through that. From there, we just dive in much deeper to, or a little bit deeper to each one of those three strategies. That's all we're doing. Okay. Excuse me. Some of the two big drawbacks from the think local, act local strategy. It can hinder transfer competencies and resources across country boundaries because the strategies in different host countries can be grounded in varying competencies and capabilities. They also do not promote building a single unified competitive advantage, especially one based on low cost leadership. I don't like that they're talking about that, but whatever. Okay, then you have the global strategy. They talk about the transnational strategy or a middle ground. For an exam, what you're going to want to remember is for transnational, for example, it's think global, act local. For what was it, multi-domestic one is think local, act local. And then not transnational, the global is think global, act global. All right. Anytime you see a green star or other writing in there that doesn't look like it belongs, that's me adding that you might want to be aware of this because you're probably going to see it again in the future. Um, one of the questions that comes up is, does operating overseas or in other countries increase our level of competitiveness? Um, there's three ways in which a firm can gain a competitive advantage by expanding outside its borders. One is you're able to use lower costs, okay, because the location, especially when we talk about U.S. Businesses in many other countries, wages are a lot less. Um, Another one is to transfer the competitively valuable resource and capability from one country to another or share them across the international borders to extend your competitive advantage. And then use cross-border coordination in ways that domestic-only competitors can't do. That might be harnessing that interest rate risk, for example. Maybe you'd be able to harness that and then lower your costs and compared to a competitor that's trying to compete against you. Um, all right, the rest of this, I think we're just going to fly through. You might want to read through this chapter again on your own, or the PowerPoint slides on your own. Oh, one last one. I should have put a little triangle on there, or a star. You need to remember the biggest developing economies in markets or countries right now in the United States. We call them BRIC countries. BRIC stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and they've added some to this. Indonesia, Thailand, and Mexico. The BRICS countries are the pretty much it's risky to operate in those countries if you're trying to expand, but the level of opportunity for growth is so huge in those countries that many businesses are trying to get a foothold over in those countries for one reason or another. Again, because they're growing economies. Um, but you might have to make some concessions and change how you're operating to some level in order to do that. Because as you can imagine, Russia, China, did I say India? Yeah, India, Bra- Brazil, Russia, India, China, S. South Africa is another one that's growing, Thailand, Poland. Um, there's risks from operating, but these are growing economies. But you can imagine trying to operate in Russia or China. Uh, it's not like operating here in the United States. The rights and the regulations may not exist over there. Your property rights don't exist like they do here. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop here. I just wanted to get this one down and out. Hope you have a good day, and we'll see you for chapter 8 on the next go around.